You know, I realized the last time I'm going to use that intro, I think the only player in that intro who's coming back next year is the reigning Heisman Trophy winner.
I literally was just about to say welcome to the Blogger Bowl, where you have seen Tyler Van Dyke for the last time in an intro. Because
Does he have any more college eligibility
I think
left?
so, but it doesn't matter. He's
Ugh.
he's out. He's out. He's terrible.
And
He's
that's what
out.
we wanted to talk about today.
That's
The
for kicking
University
off
of
today's show.
Miami's eligibility. It's
Oh,
such
but
a
that
us
was
thing to start the show that
it,
way.
I feel like it's home field apparel, or it's stuff about the. I feel like we started the show talking about the intro a lot. Home field apparel. Dan's got his Georgia stuff. I'm closing out the year with a Notre Dame shirt, which I wanted to do. Um, well, that was a game that happened last night. TCU turns out not as good as Georgia. Who would have thought?
Yeah, surprising. Uh, the final score of that game, for those of you who are uninitiated, was 65-7, and it was not as close as the score would indicate. TCU completed one big play that led to a touchdown on a coverage bust that should have been a touchdown pass, but Max Duggan, who we'll get into more in a second, Max Duggan still underthrew pretty badly, but the guy was so wide open he caught it. That set up a touchdown. Other than that, they did jack and squat in this game.
Yep.
I realize I remember YouTube dings you if you curse too early on in a show, so I'm going to try
Oh,
to do it. I think it might only be like the first 15 seconds, but or 5 seconds. But I'm going to try not to cuss during the show, which is not going to happen because I've got some
yeah.
things.
It's gonna happen
Nevertheless,
somewhere.
not as close as the score would indicate. And, the thing that comes to mind to me, I talked about this at the beginning of the season. Literally, I tweeted the clip earlier this morning from our SEC preview. I talked about how a lot of teams have tried to emulate Alabama. A lot of teams have tried to become the new Alabama. And the genius for Nick Saban isn't that he wins national championships. It's that for so many years, he was able to lose so many players to the NFL and then get right back in the mix for a national championship. And that was the next step for Georgia. They got the national championship, which is the first step to being the new Alabama. But then it was sustaining that success year over year over year. They lost 15 guys to the NFL draft. They had 15 players drafted. And really the only times they got challenged this year was when they were bored.
Yep.
Like they played a bad game against Missouri. Missouri gave them a run. I don't know if you can say like they almost lost that game because they really didn't. Florida, they fell asleep for a little bit, and Florida got within a score. Then they turned the switch, and then they flipped the switch, and then they went on. They finished off that game strong. They didn't play particularly well in a lot of games. Kentucky was kind of a meh performance. Mississippi State was kind of a meh performance. Georgia Tech, they played kind of meh and like won all of these games easily. Didn't play particularly well. SEC championship game, offense was great. The defense was not great. Like the only team who really pushed this team this year was Ohio State, and you kind of know why that is. It's just simply the most talented team they played with guys who with more talented players than Georgia had at key positions, namely quarterback and wide receiver, were able to push Georgia. Other than that, this team in 15 games was never seriously threatened at any other point, including a national championship game. We talked about it. We were optimistic and hoped that maybe TCU would compete in this game, hang around, hit some big plays, maybe try to shock and awe a little bit here. But I think everyone was kind of under the impression that there's a scenario where this goes very badly for TCU. There's no way that you could envision the literal biggest blowout in bowl game history, not just national championship, bowl game history. We're talking everything Rose Bowl, Alamo Bowl, the Blue Bonnet Bowl, the Bad Boy Mowers Gasparilla Bowl, like any bowl game, every bowl game, Bahamas Bowl.
Can't forget the GOAT.
Popeyes Bahamas Bowl. Every college football bowl game that has ever been played, this was the biggest blowout for a national championship, and that's absolutely wild.
I think what I was most disappointed in TCU last night was I get they had probably had a little bit of jitters early on, and you saw it with Duggan, overthrow then underthrow, but like, and I know it's easy to kind of quit early when Georgia's rolling downhill, but like, it just kind of seemed like they tapped out pretty early in that one, and Georgia still would have steamrolled them. Georgia still would have won by a lot, but like, they were quitting on some plays. Some coverages weren't great. Their run, they weren't really. The attempts to keep contain on outside runs were just pathetic. Like it seemed like when they went down a couple scores and they cut it 10-7 and then Georgia went right back and scored twice quickly, they were just kind of done with it. And that was a little bit disheartening. And when you have it was 17-7, they had 4th and 6 from the Georgia 45 or so. How do you punt that football? It doesn't matter. They could have ball on their own 1. They could have the ball on their own 50. Georgia's probably going down and scoring and getting points on that drive with how they played. Your TCU, what got you here was being just a gunslinger of a team, of taking shots, creating big plays, creating havoc plays on defense, which they made some efforts to do and just came up empty at just about every turn because Stetson Bennett played pretty perfectly. But you got there by being TCU and kind of having no fear and playing these close games and executing in all the biggest moments. And that to me was the game was already kind of over, but that was the ball game. When they punted that football, even though they pinned him inside the 5, that was come on, guys, what are we doing here? It's 4th and 6. You have a first-round wide receiver. Scheme a way to get him open over the middle and get him a shot. That was disheartening for me.
Yeah, at that point, I think Georgia was averaging something like 11.7 yards per play.
Insane.
When Sonny Dykes decided to punt the ball in that situation. And at that point, it's just you ain't going to win this game by punting the ball. Yeah. You're not going to win this. You're not going to win this game anyway, but you're not going to win this game punting the ball for sure. Georgia, 6 possessions in the first half, 5 touchdowns and a field goal. And the funniest part of the entire night was probably the only possession they didn't score a touchdown on in the first half was the one that started in TCU territory because of a fumble. It was that kind of thing. Now, as far as TCU's performance is concerned, I look at it from a Georgia perspective because the window dressing in college football can change and has changed a lot over 150 years. You can go from wing T, wishbone, triple option to power, I formation, pro style, spread option, air raid, whatever you want to call any offense, whatever system you want to run. Football has and forever will come down to one thing, and that is winning at the line of scrimmage. I know I'm preaching to the choir. I know you played offensive line your whole life. I played offensive line in high school. So, I don't think we're being kind of biased in our assessment there. The teams that usually win football games are the teams that are more physical and better at the point of attack at the line of scrimmage. And Georgia was just so much better than TCU at that. They broke their will. We watched TCU at times struggle on both sides of the ball, but never in the same game. We saw Kansas State really push them around with their offense, push the TCU defense around a couple of times. We saw Texas dominate TCU's offensive line. The Texas defensive line played as good as they have played ever. They completely dominated that game. They just couldn't do anything on offense. We've never seen a team put it together on both sides of the ball like that against TCU, and Georgia's offense is better than Kansas State's. Their defense is better than Texas's, and they completely dominated and broke TCU's will early in that game. TCU had one guy who looked like they had one guy who belonged on the field, and that's Quentin Johnston, and he just couldn't get open. Georgia was getting home with 3-4 guys. They were able to just basically drop 7 or 8 in coverage the entire night, and nobody for TCU could get open. Johnston couldn't get open. Tay Barber couldn't get open. Savion Williams couldn't get open. Davis was the only guy who had any kind of game whatsoever passing. Max Duggan was flustered the entire game. He played bad. You feel for him at the one point because there's just his offensive line gave him no chance. And we've seen very good quarterbacks throughout the entirety of football history struggle when their offensive line's not good. But he was objectively bad. There were just some bad throws. He was so out of rhythm. He was so psyched out playing against a team that good. It was David versus Goliath, but goes the exact opposite. It was David versus Goliath, but went the way it should have. That kind of thing. Yeah. It was the haves and the have-nots. The last thing I'll say about Georgia's physicality, and I'll shout out Bud Elliott on this, host the Cover 3 podcast. He was talking about this on their show last night. So he was talking to a coach who spent some time at Georgia this past offseason, and he asked the coach, he said, hey, what did you learn from Georgia? And the coach told him, he said, we can't do what Georgia does. Basically, Georgia's practices are physical as hell. They hit in practice the way nobody else in college football does because they know that if a starter gets hurt, the second stringer can step in and make plays. They know their third stringer is going to be in the NFL in 2 years. They have the depth to replace guys the way that really only Alabama has. Mm-hmm. And when you have that and you can hit in practice, you can be physical, your practices can be harder than the games, which probably also explains why Georgia gets bored during games when they're playing teams that just when Georgia's offensive line isn't playing a defense as good as their own defense, their mind's going to tend to wander. And that's kind of what happened in this game. Georgia just way more physical, just so much better. And just there was nothing that TCU could do in this game to win. And by the way, for all of the people who want to say, Michigan should be kicking themselves right now, maybe better for Michigan that they lost to TCU because they wouldn't have lost 65-7. But I don't think that's a 2-score game. I don't think that's a 2-touchdown game last night if it's Michigan.
No, I mean, you saw TCU's defensive line gave Michigan, like, they were able to contain the run. They were able to get to JJ McCarthy a little bit. You think Georgia's defensive line wouldn't have been able to do better without probably having to send as many people? Again, wouldn't have been 65-7, but I think the only team in college football giving Georgia a game at that point is Ohio State. And quite honestly, Georgia didn't even have their best in that game against Ohio State. They turned it on late when they had to, but like, that was not their best effort, and they still came away with a win there. And then, yeah, you go back to TCU. Like, I get that Duggan was under pressure all night, but he still had, like, it's hard to not have happy feet when you got Jalen Carter in your face in a second. Like, but still, there was just no, like, you didn't see that against Michigan. Michigan got some pressure too, and he still was making throws. The big touchdown to Quentin Johnson, he had dudes. Like, I think one or two guys like right in his face because they sent 6 or 7, I remember, on the play, and he still like stayed in the pocket there, got a ball out to Johnson, delivered it, and it was, a touchdown. That said, like, their receivers were equally as bad last night. Like, nobody was open. They were doing the all 22 film or the Skycam film behind Duggan on a lot of these replays, and like you said, Georgia's getting home with 3 or 4, which means 7 are in coverage, but like, there wasn't even anybody to bail out to because Johnson was blanketed by a corner. There was a safety over the top there. None of the receivers were really getting open. It was just an all-around head-scratching effort by TCU. It seemed like, I know they're not nearly as good of a football team as Georgia. They're not as good of a football team as Ohio State. They're probably not as good of a football team as Michigan, honestly. I know they won that game. But, like, it just seemed like they waved the white flag way too early in that one. It was disappointing me. I know they weren't going to keep up with them. I know they probably weren't going to keep that game to 3 scores, but there's no way that game should have been 65-7.
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly kind of the outlier final outcome of a very wide, like, possible outcome. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, 65-7 was certainly very unlikely, but Georgia winning by a lot was certainly a likely outcome of that game. And I just, like, it's their will was just broken early in that game. Like, they scored, but their defense could do nothing. Like, the long touchdown pass to Ladd McConkey, if you go back and watch it, I can't remember if that was the one that
there wasn't anybody within 15 yards of him.
So what ends up happening on that play is if the safety plays McConkey, whoever the slot receiver, which I think was A.D. Mitchell, it was either A.D. Mitchell or Arian Smith. If the safety plays McConkey, the slot receiver is going to be wide open for a touchdown. And if Hodges Tomlinson plays McConkey, the running back's wide open for a touchdown. Like, somebody was going to be wide open for a touchdown. Georgia kept them off guard with Georgia actually played a little bit of tempo, which is not something that they do a ton of, but they just were able to keep TCU off balance with their offense the entire game. And TCU's offense, it was just like, there was no way that TCU's defense could stop Georgia from doing whatever they wanted. And at a certain point, TCU's offense was always the strength of this team, just knew they weren't going to keep up, had their will broken. The offensive line played so badly. And, kind of talking about that, you do want to give a lot of credit to Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator for Georgia, who really transformed this offense over the last 2 years into an elite unit from top to bottom. They were so balanced. They were so good. And without really an elite wide receiver, like Brock Bowers is a tight end. I'm making the distinction between wide receiver and
George
tight end.
Pickens is the closest thing to it, but he was hurt all that. Like, he was hurt so
much.
Yeah,
and sorry, I was specifically talking about this year.
This year. Got it.
Yeah, like George Pickens, barely played last year. He was coming off the ACL. Like, their best receiver is Ladd McConkey, who is the 5th rated wide receiver in his class. Not in the country, at Georgia. He was the 5th rated wide receiver recruit in Georgia's 2020 class. And that guy was a big game player for them last night. He was one of those guys whose props I was kind of interested in, but he has knee tendonitis in his knee. Yeah. So it's like, well, that's kind of a dicey injury, but he seemed fine. And that was another thing, like Ladd McConkey looking close to 100%, Darnell Washington able to play, and Kendre Miller. I mean, it wasn't going to change the outcome of the game, but like tilting it in Georgia's favor with the injuries just kind of made it like even more.
Every injury went every coin flip injury went the direction of Georgia.
And I guess that's going to be kind of the next thing for, like, we talk about the evolution of Georgia as the next Alabama. We've talked about the ability to sustain and repeat and get back. Now the question is going to be, what does Kirby Smart's coaching tree looks like, and how is he going to be able to replace assistants. We can very clearly tell that Georgia's defense is probably going to be fine for a long time. Like with Kirby Smart kind of running that show, as long as he keeps running that show, their defense is going to be fine. Todd Monken is awesome. He did an awesome job. He's only ever been a head coach for a few years. He was at Southern Miss, so Ellis Johnson completely bottomed out the Southern Miss program, went 0-12. Monken got the job. He was there for 3 years, went from 1-11 in his first year to 9-5, and then the dysfunction of that program, which has been dysfunctional forever, he left to go to the NFL. Now he's back in college. Todd Monken's going to be there again next year, and we'll talk about the odds in a little bit in a second. But like just from like an on-field standpoint, Todd Monken will be back, but I don't understand how he's not next year's cycle one of the top names for any available big job that comes open in college football, given what he has done to transform. Now I know he's working with 5-star players, but like if Lane Kiffin and Steve Sarkisian can be hunted, can be job hunted by the biggest programs, why can't a Power 5 program come after Todd Monken like that? So for Kirby Smart, the next thing's going to be like retaining coordinators and bringing in the next guy to keep that train moving. Because we saw with Alabama, like the Bill O'Brien thing just hasn't been it's been fine. Like we could sit here and say
it's been fine.
Bad.
It just hasn't worked out to the Kiffin Sarkisian extent that we're used to these things working out to, where they win a national championship and have a 50-point per game offense.
Exactly. And then you have like the Pete Golding thing's not really working for them either, and they should probably make a change, but I don't think they're going to. So like that's going to be the next thing for Kirby Smart, and that's kind of been the one benefit that he's had is this as a program that's been hungry to win. They've had staff continuity in key spots. That's going to be interesting to see going forward the next couple of years. But the good news for them, they're going to have that going forward into next year.
Yeah. And I mean, you're talking about the jobs possibly for Todd Monken. If Jim Harbaugh does indeed have sanctions coming and he does indeed get paid a ton of money to go coach an NFL team and doesn't want to deal with whatever the NCAA is going to do, that's a phone call I'm making right away, because how many times on this show have we referred to Michigan as, Georgia light? And if I'm Michigan, I'm looking at what they're doing. I'm kind of thinking that's what we're trying to do. That's what we've been trying to build. And if you get the guy who built that offense and pretty much turned it into a machine with some top tier talent and some not, I think that's a very logical phone call to make. And I think that's one that if that job does come open here in the next couple of weeks, which we start to find that out, that's a phone call I'm making for sure.
I mean, an interesting one. I'm just kind of looking at his career arc here. Midwest guy, but hasn't coached in the Midwest since the late 90s. Like he's from Illinois, grad assistant at Grand Valley State. Did you know he spent 2 years as a grad assistant at Notre Dame? And then a few years at Eastern Michigan, and then he moved on to the Southeast, Southwest, NFL, like a bunch of other things there. So it's an interesting call. I'm assuming Michigan would probably try to swing bigger, but I don't know. Like I'm kind of with you. Like the guy has shown he can.
Oregon just went and got Dan Lanning last year. Yeah. He's like, hey, like let's go get the best coordinator. Interview him. Let's go interview the best coordinator on the best team of their best unit. And whoop, that's working out for them. They're recruiting well. They had a good year last year. I mean, Michigan would probably try and swing a little bit bigger at first, but that would be a name I think you'd have to consider.
Yeah, so like for me, the reason that Monken interests me compared to Lanning is like it's very clearly that's Kirby Smart's defense. Like it's still Kirby Smart's defense, and Dan Lanning did a good job. Dan Lanning, did a very good job at Oregon and seems to have that program on the right track. But like at the same time, that's still Kirby Smart's defense, and now Todd Monken's the guy who's really taken ownership of that offense and made them elite. So we have any other thoughts on the game last night? I mean, you can talk about all the memes. You can talk about Georgia eating chicken wings on the sideline. You can talk about Stetson Bennett needing oxygen. You can talk about
that was wild
rain. Did you see the video of the rain on the TCU crowd?
Yeah, I was watching it at a bar with some buddies, and they had the audio on, and Fowler saying like, "Man, like when it rains, it pours." Yeah. There's a little rain sneaking to the stadium, and it's just going on the TCU section.
Yeah, so if you're unfamiliar, SoFi Stadium has a roof but no like outer walls. So if it starts raining like sideways, it's going to rain in the stadium. And you could very clearly see it raining on the broadcast. And it just so happened that it was just raining on the TCU supporter section. Shout out to Stetson Bennett. I mean, a guy who a lot of people there's nothing you can say about Stetson Bennett at this point, right? Like, this is a guy who people doubted his whole career. Stetson Bennett's the one guy who can play the nobody believed in me card, and it works.
Yep.
Like, I can't remember if it was Christopher Smith or if it was I think it was Nolan Smith said everyone thought we were going to go 7-5, and it's like, what fucking world are you living in? Like, you're living in the Nick Saban world. Like, that's such a Nick Saban taught Kirby Smart, and Kirby Smart, the student has become the teacher with like this bullshit about, oh, nobody believed in us. Here's the thing. Okay. It's not disrespectful to say Georgia was the number 3 team in the country coming into this year. after what they lost last year
Yeah.
and the fact that Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are still better quarterbacks than Stetson Bennett. It was not disrespectful to say that. And it wasn't doubting them. It was saying, we think these teams might be better. It's all conjecture at the beginning of the season, but the 7-5 thing, like whatever.
I don't know where the hell that came from.
But like Stetson Bennett, nobody believed in him, and time again stepped up and made plays. It is my assertion that if you look at the list of quarterbacks who played in Week 18 in the NFL, the Josh Dobbses of the world, the Sam Ellingers of the world, the Jarrett Stidhams, the Davis Mills, Davis Webb, well, Davis Mills too, but I mean Davis Webb. You look at some of these just awful quarterbacks who played. There is going to be a role for Stetson Bennett in the NFL, and if I'm a team with a veteran leader franchise quarterback, would not mind taking Stetson Bennett late in the draft and having him as my backup quarterback.
He will be in someone's camp somewhere next year, whether that is a 7th round pick or a 6th round pick or an undrafted free agent. He's a quarterback, so he'll probably get drafted somewhere. But like, there's no doubt in my mind, and I think the team you brought up this morning when we were chatting about this was Buffalo. Like a team like that who's got an established quarterback, who's got a very talented roster around him. That if there's an injury to a quarterback, that you just kind of plug and play him and say, don't make any mistake, don't throw the ball to the other team. He's probably a guy that can do that and go 500 over a 4-game stretch in the NFL with a really good team around him.
So Case Keenum is their backup, and at this point, like I'm probably still okay with Case Keenum as my
he's not bad.
One time, but like Jacksonville has CJ Beathard backing up Trevor.
Bring him in to back up Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, well, I mean that's a whole.
Or I'm sorry, Brock Purdy, because Jimmy Garoppolo is gone next year. I meant to say Brock.
Trey Lance, like that whole thing's weird. Like I'm somehow the math doesn't make sense because they have Trey Lance, they have Brock Purdy. I'm somehow convinced Stetson Bennett's the quarterback that's going to finally get Kyle Shanahan over the top. I don't know how that's going to end up working out, but at some point
he's going to be Brock Purdy's backup, and Brock Purdy is going to get hurt. And then Brock Purdy is going to get Brock Purdy to buy Stetson Bennett.
And then, I think it's more likely people are just going to realize that Brock Purdy is Brock Purdy at some point.
That's probably the case too.
This is not an NFL show, but apparently quarterbacks making their first ever playoff start are very bad in general and against the spread. So keep that in mind next week.
I will say it's kind of nice to last thing about the game, because I think we've covered most of it of what there was to cover, because there wasn't much of it to cover. It was Georgia blowout. Very happy as a Notre Dame fan that our loss to Alabama is no longer the bar for embarrassing national championship losses. Very, very excited about that. It's good. It's nice. It's nice to have that monkey off our backs. People won't remember that one. They'll still remember it, but not nearly as much as 65-7.
Yeah, so one of my favorite stories, I think it was Stanford Steve told us this story. He was on the field for that game, and all he remembers at halftime was Alabama being pissed they weren't winning by more. Like there was a clear level of disrespect that Alabama had for Notre Dame in that game, and Georgia, I mean, the eating the chicken wings on the sideline thing, like they clearly knew going into that if they played even decently well, that game wasn't going to be close, and they came out with their hair on fire, particularly on offense, and that was basically all she wrote. And that's all she wrote for the 2022 season. So we turn the page, we turn the calendar, because content never stops, Matthew. We're not only going to do odds. I know, it's crazy. We're not only going to look at some odds right now for the national championship. We're going to talk about my favorite thing in the world, the Heisman
Trophy.
But we'll do that in a second. We'll start with the odds because that's a natural segue. I have them open at FanDuel right now. Georgia, the favorite, 3-1. Alabama is plus 500. Ohio State, 7-1. Michigan, 8-1. USC is 12-1. Clemson and LSU, 18-1. That LSU number keeps coming down. Florida State, Penn State, 20-1. Tennessee, Notre Dame, and Texas, all 25-1. Those numbers have changed since this morning as well.
Yeah, that was 30-1 this morning.
It was 30-1 this morning. Oregon, 30-1. Washington, 40-1. And the reigning national runner-ups, TCU, are 50-1 alongside Utah and Oklahoma. And since it's just always fun to kind of look, TCU was 200-1 last year before the season to win the national championship. Currently, Louisville, Arkansas, South Carolina, Central Florida, Baylor, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State are your teams at FanDuel that are 200-1. Do you have an appetite for any of those teams to win that? I don't know.
Okay, I'm not going to say do I have an appetite, but if you had to pick one of them, which one are you picking?
Probably one of the ones that's not in the SEC.
Yeah, like honestly, the first name that jumped out to me was South Carolina, but South Carolina also plays in the I think they can be a very good football team, but they run through a gauntlet of a schedule, and they're not going to come out of that unscathed enough to get them into a playoff.
I would guess Baylor because
Yeah,
like
Baylor was the one that
Baylor's
I
probably
thought.
my answer. Oklahoma State's got a lot of weird shit going on in their program right now. UCF making the jump to a major conference. South Carolina and Arkansas are out for me because they're in the SEC
Yeah.
and the Louisville. Like, I guess my argument is the team who's going to be the favorite in the SEC in the Big 12 is going to be Texas, and then second favorite is going to be Oklahoma. And I think those two teams have a lot of questions to answer. Whereas in the ACC, like we can say what we want about Clemson, but like Clemson's going to be pretty good. Florida State's going to be pretty good. Like, so yeah, it'd be one of those two teams. But okay, so I know you guys talked about it this morning, but Georgia 3-1, Alabama 5-1, Ohio State 7-1. Like, here's the thing about Georgia. Georgia, between those three teams, they're the least quarterback dependent of those three teams right now. Like, Alabama needs a good quarterback. We're not sure who their quarterback's going to be. I'll talk about that when we talk about the Heisman in a minute. Ohio State, same kind of thing. Like, Ohio State has been very good at just like next man up. Like,
Next man up is really good.
Won a national title with a third string quarterback. Like, they turn out good quarterbacks, good skill position players. Marvin Harrison Jr. will be back. Although, I don't know if you heard this. I haven't seen anybody report on this. There was a rumor going around in some sports betting circles that USC was offering Marvin Harrison Jr. an insane NIL bag to transfer. And I haven't seen anything come of that yet, but like we're going to operate under the assumption that he's back. But man, you look at like what Georgia had on the field, they're going to lose some guys again. Obviously, Stetson Bennett's gone, so on and so forth. But like, at least starting with Brock Bowers, there were just so many young sophomores and freshmen on that team that you look at Georgia's schedule too. I'm going to bring it up. I'll toss it to you.
It's an easy schedule.
I'll read Georgia's schedule here in a second while I'll bring it up while you're talking. But like, man, there's really no reason to think that this team's not going to be right back where they were.
No, I think of the three favorites that are going to be the three favorites every year for a long time now. Georgia is the one that I trust the most because we do have the quarterback uncertainty with Alabama. We saw Jalen Milroe this year, and that was the one other quarterback we saw that wasn't Bryce Young, and he left a whole lot to be desired. Obviously, we don't know, who's going to win out that job at Ohio State. And you mentioned Marvin Harrison Jr. coming back, and that's absolutely true. He will, but like this time last year, we were talking about how great that offense is going to be led by, 15 receptions for 300 yards in the Rose Bowl, Jackson Smith and Jigba. And I'm not going to say Marvin Harrison's going to do the same thing, but like Smith and Jigba tweaked a hamstring opening week and played two more times the rest of the year. Like, I'm not saying that precedent has been set, but like that window has kind of been open now, especially in that program too. And Marvin Harrison Jr. at this point already is like he's already a higher draft prospect than Smith and Jigba was last year, and that's hard to do. Smith and Jigba was seen as by far the stud receiver of that draft class last year, and Harrison's already gaining more, clout than he was. So that's something I would keep an eye on with that Ohio State program too, because they could be without their top receiver for most of the year if one weird thing happens in week 1 or 2, and he decides, hey, like I need to pump the brakes on this.
Right. So here's Ohio. Did I close it? I can't believe I just closed that. Here's Georgia's schedule. It's a really easy thing to Google. Georgia's schedule is a joke going into next year. So do you want to venture a guess? Do you know off the top of your head how many true road games Georgia plays next year?
Let's say 3.
They play 4 true road games because I guess the Florida game counts as a road game this year. Obviously, that's in Jacksonville. That's a neutral site. They go
to Tennessee, right?
Yeah. So they close the season. Ole Miss, Tennessee, Georgia Tech. Ole Miss, or they play at Tennessee, they play at Georgia Tech, they play at Vanderbilt, and they play at Auburn.
Oh.
Auburn is one I'd be a little bit more interested in if that was later on in the season than early in the season. But Georgia's schedule, UT Martin, God, that's going to look like Little Giants, like on the field, except
we gained a yard.
Exactly. UT Martin, Ball State, South Carolina at home, UAB at Auburn, Kentucky at home, at Vandy, bye week, Florida and Jacksonville, Missouri at home, Ole Miss at home, at Tennessee, and then at Georgia Tech. If you were to tell me, like, if you were gonna give me Georgia win total,
it's 11.5.
Under, like Georgia's win total, if it's 10.5,
oh my God, I'll put the house on it.
It's an overbet, and if it's
it's 11.5, it's still probably an overbet. Like I don't know. I trust Joe Milton with a pretty much brand new supporting cast of skill players around him.
By the end of the season, I'd assume that Tennessee will kind of have things up to speed there. But man, like I don't know who's going to beat them until the SEC championship game, if at all. You get into the playoff, and if you end up with 4 good teams, who knows what's going to happen? Is there another team out there? I read some of the odds. I can give the odds again if you need. Is there another team out there who kind of interests you as a potential team to kind of like keep your eye on? Do some. We've done no research on this in the interest of full disclosure. This stuff just started coming out. It's just kind of fun to look at and think about. Is there a team whose like odds you're kind of interested in and kind of want to do some
LSU's odds were the first team that jumped out to me at now 18 to 1. You said it was 20 to 1 this morning, 18 to 1. They got a lot coming back next year. Mainly their quarterbacks coming back. I know Keyshawn Butte's gone. But they're bringing back Jaden Daniels, and I think that's really huge for Brian Kelly in year 2 there. And towards the end of the year, they were playing some really, really good football. They got blown out by Georgia in the conference championship game, but Jaden Daniels got hurt in that one. A lot of teams get blown out by Georgia. That's just a thing that happens sometimes. I like that continuity they have in that program. And I think that, with the quarterback coming back second year in that offense, I think that's a team to watch out for. I don't think they have the slow start like they did last year. And the other for me is keeping an eye on Michigan's odds as well with, Blake Corum saying he's coming back. Obviously Donovan Edwards is back. JJ McCarthy's back. They're going to have to shuffle around some pieces on the offensive line, but that's a team that's, bringing back a lot of help again next year. I'm not sure what their non-conference schedule is, but judging by what it was this year, I wouldn't expect it to be much tougher. They're going to be a team that really just has to go out and win 2 football games next year. They're going to have to win at Penn State. They're going to have to win at home against Ohio State. That's just kind of what their schedule has come down to for the most part. I don't love their odds at 8 to 1. I'm going to try and see if that gets, changed at all. I don't think I take it at 8 to 1, but if it drops down to a 10 or an 11, I think that's a good one to keep an eye on. And I am going to keep my eye on Notre Dame close to 30 to 1. They bring back, we talk about the importance of winning up front. They bring back a very, very good offensive line. I think 3 of the 5 starters, both of their tackles are going to be pro prospects. They bring back their entire trio of running backs. They bring back pretty much every skill player not named Michael Mayer. And they went out and got, an elite quarterback to come in and fill in on that offense. The schedule is tough there, and that's why you're looking at closer to 30 to 1. But if you can, go 2-1 in your really tough games, I think that's a team that could be in line for a playoff bid.
So I don't even remember. I just know Michigan played UConn,
Carolina, Hawaii, and Colorado State.
I would say slightly more difficult. Like East Carolina is better than anybody they played last year.
Sure.
And that's the best team they play in their non-con. East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green. They have to go to Nebraska. They do have to go to Minnesota. The Nebraska game's pretty early, September 30th. They do have to go to East Lansing. We know weird things can happen there, but as you said, Beaver Stadium probably at night, I would assume. ABC's. Oh, no, it's CBS, so I don't know.
When is that game? How far into the year?
November 11th. It's late in the year, November 11th. They go. I'm not super confident without looking that Maryland is going to just be able to be a team that's just going to be able to reload as quickly as some others. But they do end Purdue, at Penn State, at Maryland, Ohio State. So yeah, I mean that's a
tough. That's a daunting 4 games.
Yeah, I mean that's as tough as it's going to get for them. The early part of the schedule is not all that bad. I'm interested to see what Michigan State does. I think that. What's his name? I already forgot the coach's name. Mel Tucker. Mel Tucker kind of fucked it there with the relying too much on the portal and not trying to recruit at any kind of level to level things off there. Yeah, LSU was the one that stood out to me. I mean, I agree. I'm in agreement with everything you said. I mean, Harold Perkins coming back. Their defense should be good. Their offense, a lot coming back on the offensive line, the skill position players. Quarterback things going to be really interesting because Nussmeier hasn't entered the transfer portal, which I think is open for another 8 days. I think it closes in 8 days. There might be a legit quarterback battle this year. And I don't know what it took for them to get Jaden Daniels to come back because the assumption was he was going to leave. Jaden Daniels coming back, Nussmeier coming back. It feels like this might be one of those where someone is going to have a chance to get a pretty good quarterback prospect in the portal after spring practice, which is going to be something to keep an eye on. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, I'm very fascinated to see what the Alabama quarterback situation looks like. The Pac-12, I was looking at the schedules for those teams this morning. Every team that you would think is good in the Pac-12 is going to play each other. Like USC, Oregon, Washington, and Utah all play each other. And
Cam Rising going to be the most fun conference to watch.
The best conference. No, absolutely. Cam Rising, Brent Keithy, both coming back for Utah. They're going to be good. We know what USC has coming back. USC is not going to go to the playoff. They're not going to win a national championship because they just retained Alex Grinch. That news came out when we started the show today. So they might.
Works for me.
They might win the Pac-12. They might go to the playoff. But we know that they're going to play. If they play Georgia, they would lose to Georgia 52-20. We know that, but nevertheless, all those teams play each other. So I'm out on the Pac-12. Penn State's going to be a team that a lot of people are really excited about this coming season. They've got a lot
What's
of
the
talent.
quarterback's name again? Allaire?
Aller.
Yeah.
Aller. I don't know how it's pronounced.
Whatever. Yeah, Drew. Yeah, I'm excited to see him, and I'm like, I can go back to like kind of not hating Penn State now that Sean Clifford's gone. So
yeah,
that's nice for me.
Oh man, I hate Penn State, but it's just worked with so many Penn State fans. It was annoying. So there's
Shout
another
out
team.
Noobs.
We love Noobs for sure. There's another guy who another team I'm kind of interested in. I kind of want to loop that in with Heisman stuff that I'll get to. So the favorite, of course, is going to be Caleb Williams. So this is all at FanDuel, and of course, there's 3 legal books in Connecticut, and for whatever reason, FanDuel is the only one that doesn't hang Heisman in Connecticut for some reason, and they're the only one who has them of the legals that I've seen so far of Heisman odds right now. So Caleb Williams, he's 4-1. Drake May, 10-1. Michael Penix Jr., 12-1. Michael Penix, Bo Nix, and Jordan Travis, all 12-1. Welcome to the have fun, enjoy the insane preseason hype that none of you might actually be worth. Perhaps, I don't know. As our resident number 1 Sam Hartman fan, as I believe it still says on your bar, yes, Sam Hartman, he's 18-1. Aller is 20-1. Jaden Daniels, Joe Milton, Kyle McCord, who is expected to be the guy who gets the Ohio State job, is 20-1. Cade Klubnik, Quinn Ewers, 25-1. JJ McCarthy, Brock Vandegrift, 30-1. Brock Vandegrift's probably not going to win that job. Carson Beck, who's probably going to win the job, is 40-1 at Georgia. Blake Corum, 30-1. Which is an interesting name. Ty Simpson.
That's my name.
Blake Corum?
Or that's Ty the Simpson? One I'm looking at. That Blake Corum. 30-1 with how close he was this year. I think that's a very worthwhile flyer to take.
I'm trying to get some clarity on the Alabama situation because Ty Simpson's 40-1, Jalen Milroe 60-1. I don't like Jalen Milroe as a Heisman candidate. I think he's got a lot of work that he needs to do. It would not surprise me if he ends up in the portal at some point too. If Ty Simpson wins that job, if that number still, and maybe people just aren't sure who's going to win that job at 40-1, like that's a possibility. Just kind of going down. Marvin Harrison's 50-1. I'm not betting on a wide receiver again. Cameron Rising 60-1. Arch Manning 80-1. He's not going to play this year, so don't bet on him.
Don't bet that, please.
DJ Uiagalelei is 80-1. And okay, so here's my thing. I'm going to tie this in with the number here in the team I'm kind of interested in going into the offseason, who I really kind of want to do some research on, and that's Tanner Mordecai and Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin quarterback burned me 2 years ago, Graham Mertz, because I thought he had a chance. And this is why I was mad. I should have bet. So there are 2 numbers I should have bet yesterday. First off, I was busy yesterday and I don't have any money in my Sugar House account, but LSU was 50-1 to win the national title yesterday when they first dropped those odds. And I didn't bet it. And now they're down to 20 and I just don't have a taste for it. When FanDuel opened the Heisman odds, Tanner Mordecai was 200-1. And I was like, well, shit, I should probably bet that. He's down to 120-1 right now, which is maybe still bettable. I mean, actually, I think that might have gone back up. Or maybe I was looking at
I'm looking at 120-1.
Okay. Maybe I think it's another book where he's 100. Oh, I think it's one of the other books where I do have money. He's 100-1. So I don't know how it's going to translate, but here's my thing with Wisconsin, right? Luke Fickell is a hell of a football coach. Luke Fickell coming in. He's bringing in Phil Longo, who's going to modernize that offense. I don't know what that offense is going to look like exactly. Like Phil Longo and Wisconsin football don't really sound like a match made in heaven. He has said we're not going to just like abandon the run or anything like that. He was at North Carolina. Ole Miss is a guy with a lot of credentials. Like now people will say, well, he was the offensive coordinator when Ole Miss had like A.J. Brown and DJ Metcalf and all those guys, and they weren't that great. But if you look at what they did at North Carolina this year, it was spectacular. Braylon Allen will be back. They'll have their top 3 wide receivers back this year. And if you look at their schedule, they don't play Michigan, they don't play Penn State, and they get Ohio State at home. Like it's a very favorable schedule for Wisconsin. Now, I'm not as a national championship contender. I just don't think they've got the talent. But like I'm going to be interested to see what their make the playoff odds look like, because they're in a situation where they can potentially just have to beat somebody in the Big Ten championship game to make it. They could have like a season like an Iowa had a few years ago where they came so close, or like Michigan State had a few years ago where they came so close to making it. So I'm going to do some digging. I want to do some digging what they have coming back on their line, what their defense is going to look like, but just like schedule spot and like where the long shot kind of odds are right now. That's something that kind of interests me as a team that I'm going to kind of keep my eye on. And just because we have to, our guy, Shedeur Sanders, he's 150-1 right now.
Don't bet Shedeur Sanders, please. Listeners.
So I guess another one, like Colin Schlee, if UCLA is going to be good, he's 150-1. Graham Mertz at Florida, he's 150 to 1.
Don't bet him either.
I don't know if Florida would want him.
Who else
Drew,
do we have
your
here?
guy Drew Pine is 200
Drew
to 1.
Pine. Take Drew Pine to win the Heisman, people. I dare you.
This is fun to kind of look through. Some of these names I don't even know that.
Brock Bowers, 150 to 1.
They're not giving the Heisman Trophy to a tight end. JT Daniels at where did JT Daniels end up?
Rice.
300 to 1.
That's gonna happen. Yeah. Good bet, people.
The guy who's going to be starting at Minnesota is 400 to 1. You must mean he's
don't
not
bet him either. Please don't bet him.
I'm just looking, man. It's wild.
Nick Singleton at 50 to 1 is an interesting one. He had a great year this year, and if Penn State does take a step forward and maybe does beat Michigan at home, maybe they do, knock off. I mean, that's a team in the Big Ten that, they get Michigan at home. They get an Ohio State team that they have to go to Ohio State, but they have some new pieces there. If there's going to be a year to put it all together, he would. I mean, he was their best player this year. I think he's going to get even better next year. He's a really dynamic player, and I mean, Saquon Barkley didn't win the Heisman, but he was right up there.
I think my problem is anytime you have a team with a new quarterback and if they make the jump with a new quarterback, the quarterback is going to be the one who gets so much credit for that success. Like Penn State won 10 games this year, won 11 games technically, right? They won 11-2. They won the Rose Bowl. So if they make the jump to play actual playoff team, a lot of people I think are going to give credit to the quarterback in that.
That's fair, but if you have a path like how Michigan did it this year, where they relied heavily on the run, I mean, some people after they beat Ohio State said J.J. McCarthy should be in the Heisman race, but no one actually thought that. Blake Corum was a Heisman frontrunner for a little while there until he got hurt. So I tend to believe you're right. I'm just saying there is a little bit of a path. 50 to 1 is probably not good enough odds yet. Maybe if that drops a little bit, but this year kind of showed that there is that path there if it is a pretty run heavy offense and you have a guy in Nick Singleton who's rushing for over 110 a game.
I just got super sidetracked by something, so now I have to double check and make sure that's the same person I'm thinking of. Jaden Blue. Is there another Jaden Blue? No, that is the running back for Texas, is 100 to 1, who didn't even play in the bowl game and is probably not going to be their starting running back. Sure, he's 100 to 1. There's a good way to waste some of your hard-earned money. If that's what you want to do. So, yeah, man. Georgia won. Georgia's going to win. Maybe we should just bet on Carson Beck.
What's I like your Stetson Bennett Career Achievement Award. I think I might look at a Cam Rising Career Achievement Award. I might take a look at. See if there's a Cam Rising Heisman finalist award.
If Bet Online does that again. The problem is when I bet that for Stetson Bennett, I feel like his Heisman odds were close to 100 to 1.
Okay.
At the time, Cam Rising's 60 to 1 to win the Heisman, and maybe. But the other thing is are people going to watch enough Pac-12 football? That's the other thing. The only Pac-12 player that people have voted for the Heisman who didn't go to USC in this century were Christian McCaffrey, the other running back from Stanford, and Marcus Mariota, who was the favorite going into the season. You have to be that high up to have a shot if you don't go to USC.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And as good as it you and I, we're football fans understand the Pac-12 is a banger of a conference. It's going to be an awesome conference again next year. But are enough people going to watch it to realize okay, that guy can ball? Our last image of Cam Rising was getting hurt in the Rose Bowl and then leaving the Rose Bowl for the second year in a row.
That was tough.
Whereas our last view of Michael Penix was beating up on a bad Texas team. I don't know.
Texas wasn't bad. Don't say bad Texas team.
No, Texas is a bad football team without Bijan Robinson. Period. Point blank. Period. I'm not getting into that. We're not doing that. We've been going for 45 minutes. I'm not going to launch into how it was the one scenario in a bowl game that legitimately make Texas fans have reason to be really angry with the coaching staff and how they poured what they did in that bowl game. Nevertheless, number 3, I'm claiming a national championship in recruiting because Georgia and Alabama don't count. They're professional football teams. So Texas, the number 1 recruiting class in college football for normal football programs. We did it, baby. We're number 1. And Texas, they just you have Sam Hartman. We have Jalen Catalon. Jalen Catalon was a second-team All-SEC safety 2 years ago. He's an All-American potential who played 6 games in 2021, and I don't think played a full game last year until he got hurt. So there you go.
All
I
right.
don't know, man. Like Texas is going to be the favorite. We're going to do the shit we do every year. Texas is going to be the favorite to win the Big 12, and then they manage to lose games they shouldn't lose, and someone like fucking Baylor. Maybe it's Texas Tech's turn. Maybe Texas Tech is going to be the one, or maybe it'll be one of the new teams. Matt, the next time we do that, I mean, maybe we'll do a kind of a check-in at some point, but the next time we start legitimately previewing football, there are going to be 3 new teams in the Big 12.
Cincinnati, UCF, and who's the last
Houston.
one? Houston. I keep forgetting Houston's making that jump. I think Houston's going to have some trouble.
I think all 3 of them are going to have a bit of a growing pain because you're not playing East Carolina and Temple anymore. The worst team in that league would probably finish second or third in your league, at least in the Big 12 this year. So it's going to be quite the jump. I think Cincinnati's higher. God. Every time I think about Cincinnati, I think they hired Scott Satterfield as a guy who Louisville kind of wanted to fire. And they're like, hey,
like the guy who hated being at Louisville and Louisville hated having him. Like, it was just like the day after, it was like a week after he got hired. He's saying like the airport's his favorite part about Louisville, and just everybody knew that he didn't want to be there, and they didn't really want him there either. That was an interesting hire.
Man, I don't know. So I'm not super high on that. Yeah, that's the season. It was a great one. We appreciate everyone rolling with us. We had a lot of fun. If you have any suggestions for content, what we could do differently, what you want us to talk about next season, hit us up on the Twitter. I'm at really Dan Weiner. You can see it right there. He is at #1 Sam Hartman fan. No, he's at mrooney23 on the Twitter. I can never remember. Is it at Philip with one
Philip _ GOFD?
Are there two underscores?
There's 2 underscores.
We got to talk to Phil. We got to have an intervention with Phil about that.
Corporate Phil,
we got to have an intervention. 2 underscores is a nightmare. Oh, yeah, forgot. Shout out South Dakota State, the Jackrabbits, winning the national
best helmets in the game. Very good helmets. So cool.
Shout out John Stiglmeyer, 26 years as the head coach.
Best name in the game, too.
Finally got his national title. The Yankee Twins will be back. Like Georgia, they're gonna come back with a chance to repeat. So we look forward to that. Shout out to Holy Cross. The last thing I'll say before we wrap this, Holy Cross, the second best team in FCS. Based on how the playoffs played out, they played South Dakota State better than anyone else did. So Holy Cross, second
Shout
best.
out Phil. Congrats, Phil. You're number 2.
Second best team. All right, I'm claiming Texas gets the national championship in recruiting. I'm claiming that the people's number 2 team in FCS, the Holy Cross Crusaders. And on that, that's
Can I claim that Notre Dame won the portal?
Sure. Why not?
They did. Won the portal. Sure. You got Sam Hartman. You won the portal.
You can say that they won the handsomest quarterback award.
We did.
So
is
there
handsome.
You go. So you did get the most handsome quarterback. And hey, look, at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. We appreciate everyone for tuning in throughout the season. We'll be back at some point. I don't know when. We'll come up with some off-season content to keep you all up to date on what's going on in the world of college football. But congratulations to South Dakota State. Congratulations to the Georgia Bulldogs on winning back-to-back national championship chips, plural, for Corporate Phil, who we miss and hope everything is going well and hope will be able to join us in the fall. For Matt Rooney, I'm Dan Weiner. We will talk to you at some point in the future.